Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, today, joined by Makone Maja. Now, let's get into our first news story of today, and I think the thing we have to talk about first is the implosion of the MK Party's case challenging the election results. So when I say implosion, it's not quite like there was a dramatic fall apart and they lost in court or anything like that. But the MK Party has decided that it is going to withdraw its court application to have the 2024 general elections decide. The party had been saying for weeks that they just had this mountain of evidence, this huge amounts of evidence, so much evidence, but they didn't want to release it yet because there were strategic reasons they didn't want to release it. And now they say that in response to the IEC's affidavit, in response to them, that they are withdrawing their application to change legal strategy. The MK Party says that its experts are still collating evidence of vote rigging, and that they will be, at some point in the future that is undisclosed, maybe relaunching court action. Originally, MK had wanted the entire election, to be reheld in 90 days after the court judgment, which, I mean, never mind the fact that they hadn't produced any evidence that the whole thing was stolen. It was also going to be very difficult, I think, to rehold the election in 90 days, considering the IEC struggles with doing it with all the lead up they had this time. But anyway, they said that this was a temporary withdrawal. The withdrawal is in no way an admission that our client does not have a compelling case for the order it seeks. The contrary is true, said their lawyers. He said that MK Party experts were being engaged and would continue to uncover further evidence of election irregularities. Makone, MK has not really demonstrated their, shall we say, efficiency when it came to this case. And there were all sorts of delays and holdups. They didn't send court papers to various parties involved in the matter. They kept talking about all this evidence, and of course, they produced none. And now they're just sort of quietly slinking away, saying, no, we swear we'll be back in court. But I have a feeling they're not going to be back in court. What do you make of this?
No, I don't think they'll be back in court either. And like you pointed out, Nick, people whose evidence has only gotten stronger, as the MK Party claims in that article, that the affidavit of the IEC made some revelations that strengthen their case and provides evidence for election rigging. Such people are not exactly the sort of people that then make their case go away. You forge on, especially if you believe that the evidence so proves your case. So not surprising there. You and I spoke earlier about this case and how difficult it would be to rig the election at that level, that the whole thing would need to be recalled. Or certainly that it would change the outcome of the election so favorably to the MK as they had hoped. But that, of course, there would be mistakes because people who count ballots and people who facilitate the election are human, and they work insane hours and are, of course, prone to making such errors.
Right. I think I'm correct in saying that MK has claimed that they've won either more than 50% of the vote or 2/3 of the vote, which is utterly insane.
No, that would be a scandal. That would be a cause for a huge riot in this country.
Yeah. If they had been reduced from 66% of the vote to the 14 that they got, the vote rigging would be so obvious, people from space would be able to see it.
Exactly. And yet no one has come forward with any credible evidence. In fact, it seemed to me that the evidence they were claiming to provide was just lazy. I mean, they were if you remember from the evidence they did provide, they provided tables where numbers were not adding up. But that of course is not evidence of any election rigging or election theft, because those tables could have been compiled by virtually anyone. They're not sufficient. So no surprises from the MK on this one. I think initially I thought they were surprised by their own outcome, meaning surprised at how well they had done. But then it seems they went back and thought maybe they'd done even better than they already had. But yeah, I'm glad that we can put this election rigging thing behind us. We need to have trust in our institutions, and the IEC's performance was very poor during this election. But at least we can trust the outcome from the outcome of this case, particularly, we can put this thing behind us and move on to forming a government.
Right, so let's move on to our next story, and this is regarding the big gas finds in the waters off of Mossel Bay, which would have been, which have the potential to be a significant economic asset for South Africa and maybe even reduce some of our energy costs. Oh, just before I continue, forgotten to say that it has apparently been 100 days without load shedding, according to the Eskom's push app, and I think that's about right. And that's actually a bit of a surprise to me. Firstly, because I very cynically believed that perhaps load shedding would return on the day after the election, and I'm very happy to have been wrong on that one. But yeah, no, that needs a much larger discussion later, but we're not going to have that today. So, regarding this gas find, there was this sort of test wells which seemed to have located a significant amount of gas, natural gas that can be harvested. But one of the stakeholders, so not all of the stakeholders, but Total Energies, is who hold a 45% stake in one of the gas mining blocks there, have decided that they are going to be withdrawing, essentially cutting loose their money they've already spent on this. The total investment is $400 million into exploration there, which is a huge amount of money. And despite the fact that there's no compensation, it seems, that Total Energy is going to get from this, they have decided that they're not going to go forward. Now, there are still companies involved in this, namely Africa Energy Corp, and a number of others who have said that they're going to continue developing these gas wells. But apparently the main cause of why Total Energy has decided not to move forward with putting more money into this is that they are deeply unhappy with the lack of support from the South African government for their discoveries. They also say that they've had big problems coming to a deal with Petro SA when it comes to sort of refining and processing the gas that they would find, because presumably I think they would have to liquefy it and then send it overseas in ships, which they were hoping to use South African infrastructure for. So, Makone, this doesn't mean, of course, this investment is dead or that it's never going to happen or anything like that. There's still people going ahead with it. But having a big multinational invest in this kind of thing is actually usually better than having smaller companies, because when a big multinational from Europe or something invests in a gas well and then they make a mistake, like, I don't know, they poison all the fish or something, you can sue them in a European court and hold them to account. You can put pressure on them. You can drag their name through the mud because everyone knows who they are. They can take real reputational damage. But with them pulling out, the only people going to be invested of, shall we say, ones who are perhaps not up to the same level of accountability. So I think that there are a number of reasons why this is not great. And one of them is that it's probably going to, in the long term, be bad for the environment. What's your take on this?
Like, in addition to, I think, Total's withdrawal, you've also seen that Canadian natural resource company CNR also say that they've withdrawn even before Total. So between those two, if Total shares about 40-45% plus CNR's 20% share, you have 60% worth of investment essentially gone. But like you indicated, there are companies that can come in and fill in that spot, although they may be smaller, less experienced than your Totals of the world, unless if it's the Russians, which I think the article also speaks about, that the ANC seem to be, or the government seem to be rather keen to be working with them. I think the issue of government resistance, or government just basically not facilitating the move for gas exploration in the country, speaks to infrastructure and the lack thereof, and that where you have, I think we lack sufficient pipeline kilometers to transmit the gas. As you indicated, we'd be exporting it, so you definitely need pipeline infrastructure, but you'd also need port facilities for those imports and exports of the liquefied natural gas, and you'd need government to come in and facilitate those roles specifically, especially in a country like South Africa, where it's state-owned entities like Transnet that manage those specific services. So you have the government not acting and moving quick enough, despite the fact that we are predicted to run out of gas by 2026. I mean, if if that's the case, are we to learn from this as we did in load shedding, that we only move and start to worry ourselves with the running out of gas a few weeks before its expiration date? I'm quite concerned about that. I'm concerned about how this makes us look on the world scale as well, on the world stage as well, that South Africa is quite hostile to investment, and that the government basically sits on its laurels instead of quickening and enabling that investor-friendly environment, business-friendly environment that would invite more companies like Total and CNR to invest in our infrastructure.
Yeah, Minister Gwede Mantashe has not been great on some of the stuff. The ANC has pushed through, bills regulating gas and oil that are, filled with carve-out for BEE and regulations and expenses, and they just make the cost of investing so high that, basically the only ones who are going to invest are those who are probably not going to follow the rules or think they can cut a special deal because of political connections, which I think is is terrible actually for the economy. Partly because this is a resource we could really use. Anyway,
also because gas is not static, right? It moves, so time is of the essence in this sense as well. But yeah, like you said, government makes it not only expensive but takes forever for them to implement. And so I think Total or CNR, one of the two, has indicated that they'll be moving on to Namibia. It seems the government is better and more welcoming of them there. And like I think Busisiwe Mavuso once said, capital has an address and it goes to where it's invited.
Yeah, exactly. So we are in competition with other places, and if we don't act on this kind of thing, it's just going to drag ahead, and we're going to see ourselves get left behind. Anyway, last story. Let's very quickly talk about the statement that's come out from the ANC. It's called ANC Statement on Clarification of ANC-led Government of National Unity Policy Platform. The African National Congress has noted a growing narrative of uncertainty in public discourse about the policy platform of the ANC-led Government of National Unity. We have also received a series of media inquiries about the same matter. This seems to be triggered by pronouncements made by individual political parties within and outside the Government of National Unity, as well as unfamiliarity with the agreed-to principles of the Government of National Unity. The ANC wants to categorically state that there is certainty about the policy platforms of the ANC-led GNU. This was agreed to by all political parties who signed the GNU Statement of Intent, and the agreement that exists of sealed mandates where each minister in the GNU pursues their sectarian party policies. Such an agreement would run counter to both the letter and spirit of the Constitution, which all the GNU's signatories have agreed to act on the basis of. They then go on to say that Clause 19 deals with instances where substantive disagreements over policy arise. Subclause 19.3 explains that the majority that must be canvassed by a party wishing to repeal, change, or introduce a policy. Taken into proper context, especially Clause 19.3, it would seem to be understood that all existing government policies remain in effect without expectation, or any other interpretations of this clause cannot be taken seriously at this point. So, Makone, this is obviously, I think, the ANC trying to establish how this thing is going to work in practice. And it looks a lot to me like the ANC is essentially trying to say to other parties, particularly the DA, you may think you have some sort of leeway to produce your own, to implement your own ideas here, but actually you got none. You're going to have to just implement our policies. And one really does have to ask, what's really the point in being a minister if you can't change anything? What do you make of this?
Or of inviting outside parties if you expect them to follow strictly along ANC orthodoxies. That also doesn't make sense to me, Nick. I'm also concerned now. It seems that the public arena is where the ANC and the DA will now be handling whatever conflict arises out of the GNU. I'm sure he could have sent this in an email to the GNU partners that he's referring to instead of using the public platform to resolve whatever conflicts seem to be arising there. But absolutely defeats the purpose of inviting parties that are different from you into a government of national unity if you're going to expect them to follow along very strictly what your policy positions are. I think people in putting together this government that where no single party has majority, wanted diversity of ideas, diversity of policy, and that diversity must be reflected and it must be encouraged. Ministers being able to act autonomously, right? Instead of basically producing ministers or ministries that are identical to each other. Diversity of thought should definitely be encouraged, certainly within the GNU.
Exactly. I mean, is the ANC going to be expecting the Freedom Front Plus and the DA to go along with expropriation of private property? That's just kind of madness. And I think one could read this more charitably. There's this mechanism about having a majority that must agree upon whether you can move forward. But the whole idea of proportionality seems to have completely fallen apart in the negotiations, with the ANC in the appointment of cabinet kind of ignoring it, right? Giving themselves many, many more ministers than everyone else. Meaning that, does that mean that every time cabinet has a disagreement, they're going to all vote in cabinet and, oh, what do you know? There's like 20 ANC ministers, and so they'll always have the majority, so everyone else will just be ignored. And if that's how it's going to work, then this is going to be kind of a bit of a disaster.
Also defeats the purpose of power being shared, which as I understand, is what the GNU statement of intent is, a power sharing agreement. But there's no sharing of power if we're always going to be reminded about the ANC-led GNU as some sort of the ANC stamping its monopoly on the ideas and how the ministers within this GNU are to act.
Yeah, exactly right. Okay, that's all the time we have for today. I hope you all found this show interesting, and we will be back tomorrow. That's a wrap. The Daily Friend Show and The Daily Friend are a project of the Institute of Race Relations, the IRR. The IRR is a think tank which was founded in 1929 to study race relations in South Africa and works to change government policy to improve race relations through non-racialism and to ensure the prosperity of all South Africans. If you like our work and would like to support us, please go to irr.org.za and click Support the IRR. Or you can go to thedailyfriend.co.za and click the Fund Us button.